The rain came down in sheets, turning the alley into a river of broken reflections. Marcus pulled his thin coat tighter as he locked the door of the shelter for the night, already counting the coins in his pocket and wondering how to stretch them until morning. That was when he heard the sob. It was small, frightened, trying to hide itself. He turned and saw a woman clutching a little girl beneath a flickering streetlight, both soaked, both shaking. The woman's eyes held the look Marcus knew too well, the look of someone who had learned to expect pain before kindness. He didn't ask questions. He never did when someone looked like that. He simply unlocked the door again and waved them in. Inside, the shelter smelled of old wood and soup that had long gone cold. Marcus gave them towels, then his own dinner without hesitation. The girl stared at him as if he were unreal, as if men only came in one terrible shape. The woman finally spoke, her voice cracked and careful. She said her name was Elena, that the man hunting them was her ex-husband, a billionaire who collected people the way he collected buildings, breaking them when they no longer pleased him. Marcus listened, not with shock, but with recognition. Power didn't change cruelty, it only gave it better shoes. When Elena showed the bruises she tried to hide, Marcus felt a familiar fire rise in his chest, not anger that burned wild, but resolve that burned steady. That night, as sirens wailed in the distance, Marcus slept on the floor so they could have the beds. Memories crowded him, growing up invisible, working until his hands cracked, learning that the world often mistook poverty for weakness and black skin for guilt. Yet he had learned something else too. That dignity could be an act of rebellion. When headlights swept across the shelter windows near dawn, Marcus stood between the door and the sleeping mother and child without thinking. Fear knocked in his chest, but he did not open the door to it. Whatever came next, they would not face it alone. Morning brought noise and threat in equal measure. The billionaire arrived in a polished car, lawyers in tow, his voice smooth as glass and just as cutting. He spoke of ownership, of custody, of mistakes that needed correcting. Marcus stepped outside to meet him, standing small in money but tall in purpose. He spoke calmly, loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, naming the abuse, naming the fear, naming the lies. Phones came out, windows opened. The rich man's smile thinned as the crowd grew. He tried intimidation. It slid off Marcus like rain. He tried bribery. Marcus laughed. A sound so honest it startled even himself. Elena emerged then, holding her daughter's hand. The girl squeezed Marcus's fingers, grounding him. The billionaire's power began to leak away under the weight of witnesses and truth. A local reporter arrived, then police. This time not to push Marcus aside, but to listen. Records surfaced, restraining orders long buried by money finally unearthed. The man was escorted away, furious and exposed, his empire suddenly smaller than a single brave step. Weeks later, the shelter buzzed with life. Donations arrived, volunteers signed up, and Elena found work, then a place of her own. On the day she left, she hugged Marcus and thanked him for believing her when belief felt impossible. Marcus watched them walk into the sunlight, feeling lighter than he had in years. He returned to sweeping the floor, humming softly, knowing triumph didn't always look like applause. Sometimes it looked like a door unlocked in the rain, a stand taken without armor, and a future reclaimed by ordinary courage that refused to bow. The courtroom felt colder than the shelter ever had. Marble floors, high ceilings, and eyes that measured worth in tailored suits and whispered numbers. Elena sat rigid, her daughter's small hand locked in hers, while the billionaire's attorneys moved with rehearsed confidence, stacking papers like weapons. Marcus sat behind them, his back straight, his hands steady despite the weight pressing on his chest. He didn't belong here by the world's rules, and everyone could see it. That was exactly why he refused to shrink. The billionaire entered last, commanding the room with a smile polished by money. He spoke softly, as if kindness were his natural state, painting Elena as unstable, ungrateful, reckless. Each word was a blade meant to cut her credibility. Marcus watched the judge's eyes, watched the room lean toward wealth the way it always did. When Elena was asked to speak, her voice trembled. Trauma does that, it steals volume, steals certainty. The billionaire smirked. He had paid for that silence years ago. Then Marcus stood when his name was called, and the room shifted in a way it didn't expect. He spoke without notes, without polish, but with truth sharpened by lived experience. He described the night of the rain, the fear he recognized because he had worn it himself. He named the bruises, the threats, the control disguised as care. He did not exaggerate, he did not beg, he simply refused to let lies sit comfortably. When the billionaire's lawyer tried to dismiss him as just a shelter worker, Marcus met the judge's gaze and said, "I know what power does when it thinks no one is watching." Something cracked open then. Text messages were introduced. Screenshots Elena had been too afraid to share before. Financial records followed, patterns of hush money and intimidation traced like fingerprints. The billionaire's composure faltered. His voice rose, control slipped. The judge noticed, so did everyone else. Outside, the press gathered. Stories spread not because they were sensational, but because they were undeniable. A man with everything had tried to erase a woman and her child. A man with almost nothing had stood in the way and refused to move. When the ruling came down, it felt unreal. Full protection granted, custody secured, investigations ordered. The billionaire was no longer untouchable. He was accountable. Weeks later, the shelter hosted a small celebration, not loud, not flashy, just food, laughter, and relief. Elena had a new apartment. Her daughter slept through the night. Marcus received a letter from the city recognizing his service, but he tucked it into a drawer. Recognition was never the point. Dignity was. One evening, as Marcus locked up, the same streetlight flickered on. This time, the rain didn't come. He looked down the quiet street and smiled, knowing triumph wasn't about winning against the powerful. It was about standing firm so the vulnerable could stand again, and realizing that was more than enough.